Welcome, everyone. My name is Mike Donais. I'm a lead game designer on Hearthstone.
My name is Ben Brode. I'm the game director on Hearthstone. Got some exciting stuff to talk about today.
Yeah, we're going to tell you a little bit about the blog post that we put last week, and we're going to go over some of the questions you guys have on the blog post. We're going to do a quick recap of it before we get to the questions.
Sweet. You want to start us off recapping?
Why don't you do the recap?
Okay, great. So to start us off, we talked about the new year of Standard, the year of the Mammoth, which is going to kick off with the release of the next set, and we're going to make the Grand Tournament, League of Explorers, and Blackrock Mountain exclusive to Wild, which are the sets that came out in 2015. And we have a new concept, the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, the Hall of Fame is really important because it helps make the game stay fresh. The Hall of Fame is essentially we took 6 cards out of the classic set, the ones that were getting played the most or had some issues with them, and we moved them into the Hall of Fame, which is a set that's exclusive to Wild, and it means that you could play these cards still in Wild, still play your favorite decks. Ice Lance is one example of the card from that list, and it's really important because now you can play Freeze Mage in Wild, but at the same time, Standard stays fresh.
We also are going to change the release methodology for how we're going to do sets going forward. So we're going to do 3 expansions a year, and starting with the second expansion this year, we're going to do single-player adventures, single-player missions to go along with the expansions. So they'll be free, and we're probably going to give out packs as rewards for doing the adventures, as opposed to individual unique gameplay exclusive cards like we've done with previous adventures. So you'll earn packs along the way instead.
I think that's going to be really fun, and that's something that we're going to continue to experiment with and iterate on as we go, because I think there's a lot to learn still in that area.
Another thing we're excited about is celebrating the year of the Mammoth. We have some cool stuff running up towards the release of the next set and the second ever Standard rotation. There'll be some daily login rewards leading up until that rotation, some cool brawls, and also the new hero Maev, which you'll earn just by playing 10 games of Standard when that all goes live.
I'm looking forward to that. Rogue is one of my favorite classes.
So that's the recap. That's kind of the general overview of what the year of the Mammoth is, what we're thinking. I definitely encourage you to give a look at the blog that we posted last week. It's got a lot more detail about that if you haven't already. All right, ready to take some questions?
Yeah, we've got a question here from Rayleigh from the forums. When will the 6 classic cards be rotated to the Hall of Fame? When the next expansion patch goes live, or when the patch for Small Time Buccaneer and Spirit Claws goes live? So the Small Time Buccaneer and Spirit Claws changes are happening at the end of this month, while the 6 classic cards are not being rotated to Hall of Fame. That's not happening until the new expansion comes out. So that the new expansion, the rotation of Wild, that all happens at the same time. So that's going to be significantly after the Small Time Buccaneer nerf.
Sweet. Another question from Thomas B. At TomTom2000 on Twitter. Will the classic cards that are being moved to Hall of Fame still be obtainable through packs or only by crafting them?
Yeah, the classic cards, they're definitely going to still be... They're going to be only in Hall of Fame, which means only in Wild. So the classic set won't include them anymore, which means when you open classic packs, you will not see these cards. If you want to get them, you need to craft them or own them ahead of time.
Troyo Fathens from the blog. Will you be able to disenchant Hall of Fame cards, allowing you to get the full dust reward for logging in and the amount of dust from disenchanting the card itself? So just to give kind of a recap of how the dust stuff is going to work with the Hall of Fame, because we're taking some cards from Classic, making them exclusive to Wild in the Hall of Fame set. We were considering giving full dust refunds for the cards that are moving out of Classic, but we felt like it's really important for Wild to be awesome, and we didn't want players to be incentivized to disenchant their awesome Wild cards, their awesome Hall of Fame cards. And so instead, we figured let's just let players keep the cards and just give full dust values for the cards that are being rotated that you own up to the maximum that you can have in a deck. So, if you have, let's say, a Ragnaros and a Golden Ragnaros, you'll get 3,200 dust for the Golden Ragnaros, because that's the maximum you can put into a deck. And the question here is, can you then also disenchant Ragnaros after the rotation and keep the dust that you got for free, as well as get the dust for disenchanting Ragnaros? The answer is yes, you can. But I will say that we do think that Wild is going to be significantly more awesome this year, just for a couple reasons. One, there's the difference between Standard and Wild is much bigger this year with this more sets difference between the two. And we also plan a lot more Wild support in tournaments, and we're doing a Wild Heroic Brawl, for example, as well. But that's just the start. I think we have a lot more work to do to make Wild awesome, and we're going to continue to do that.
I'm going to go with the next question. What stats, this is from Storm Fever, at Storm Fever HS. Could you share some stats that were influential when deciding the Hall of Fame set? So the important thing is it wasn't just stats. We used a lot of different metrics. But because he specifically asked about stats, one of the things we've noticed is these cards are getting played a lot. Azure Drake, for example, is being played by far the most of any classic card. You can see it both on the ladder, you can see it in the tournaments. No matter where you look, Azure Drake is a super popular card. And this has held true for many, many expansions, many years even. So it's an obvious pick. Another thing that we looked at is when you're looking at, we chose more expensive cards in general, Sylvanas, Ragnaros, and Azure Drake, both all more expensive than, say, a card like Thalnos, which is getting played a lot, but you have some other options at that mana cost. When you're looking at 6 to 8 mana cost, you have less choices for your deck because you play less cards of that mana cost. So Ragnaros has a very big impact on every expensive card we print.
Another question here from Twitch chat. Leo Crone asks, are you going to make more classic cards to replace the ones being rotated to the Hall of Fame? It's kind of, I'm not sure. This changed because there's 3 classic class-specific cards. Leaves Mage, Rogue, and Ice Lance, Conceal, and Power Rolling Warlock, with one less card than the classes in Classic. So we could add cards. I think if we did, we would be looking for filling specific types of roles. Classic has some things about it that are important for us. One is the first set past Basic that players are introduced to. So there's kind of a smooth curve of complexity creep over time. I think our expansions are allowed to be a lot more complicated. But the Classic set, we hold back a little bit on that. That's not there's definitely some very complicated cards there, so it isn't a hard and fast rule, but something that I think we should be looking at, especially for commons in Classic. And then also, I think it's important to think about the problems we're having with Classic right now, which is that it's a very powerful set, more powerful than any other set, basically. There's more Classic and Basic cards in decks than any other set's cards. And that's a problem we've been facing. That's why we're doing the Hall of Fame. That's why we nerfed a bunch of cards when the standard rotation first launched. So I think we would want to make that problem better and not worse for ourselves. I think an example of a card that might make sense to add to Classic is Shatter from Whispers of the Old Gods. Costs 2 mana. It says destroy a frozen minion. It's simple. It's interesting. It's unlikely to have a massive impact on the meta, but it also helps define mages as the class that cares the most about the freeze mechanic. And I think it's just in general kind of a cool card that is low enough power level that it won't make the problem we're having, where Classic is by far the most powerful set, even worse.
I think that's a really good question. It brings up the idea that we talked about where could we just make all the cards more powerful? And that's something that we explored. To make Classic a smaller percentage or a more reasonable percentage is just make all the cards more powerful. And we decided after exploring that idea that it sped up the game in unhealthy ways too much. When Hearthstone Classic came out, we had a really good pace. The amount of life that was going back and forth, how fast you had to react to different threats. It was at a pretty good pace. So while we have printed more powerful cards in some areas than others, we still need to keep the pace of the game about the same. And rotating these Classic cards out helps us do that.
All right, here's another question. Thomas Elliott. At TalX from Twitter. How will you decide in the future whether to nerf a card or simply shift it to the Hall of Fame?
So, we don't have a hard and fast rule for whether we should nerf or shift it to Hall of Fame. Generally speaking, though, we think about the goals. Classic is going to be around forever, and we want new cards to be new and exciting. We want new sets to be new and exciting. One of the things people love about Hearthstone the most is when a new expansion comes out and they have new decks to play, and new decks, they're not sure if they're good or not sure who has the best version yet, and they get to make those best versions. To do that, we need the cards in Classic to not, be the dominant part of the meta. So if it's a Classic card, we're more likely to shift it to the Hall of Fame. If it's from an expansion, we're more likely to nerf it, as a general rule.
Also, I think it's important to think about the experience in both Wild and Standard. We haven't made any nerfs yet, specifically for Wild, but if it was a card that was affecting Wild balance, then putting it in the Hall of Fame doesn't help Wild. So we would be nerfing it in that case. We're totally open to making nerfs for cards that are affecting Wild balance negatively, but I will say that the threshold is really different. I think the expectation of Wild decks is that they are more powerful. There are way more cards to choose from, and so the amount of potential synergies goes way up, and the power level goes way up as well because of that. So trying to figure out where the line is for Wild power level is going to be something that we're going to have to learn over time, I think. It's not immediately obvious what that should be. But we're certainly open to taking an active role in the balance of that format. It's certainly a format we care about and we'll be looking at.
One of the things about Wild that I'm most excited for is the new cards that are coming out with each new expansion going forward, interacting with cards that have been gone for 2 or 3 years. These are cards that you'll never see interacting together in Standard, but you will see them interacting together in Wild. And I think that those interactions get more and more interesting as that set gets bigger and bigger. So I think that starting, with the next release, we're going to see a lot of very cool Wild decks that won't also be seeing in Standard. Our next question is from Dave at the Dave. Will you reverse the nerf for cards like Blade Flurry, Molten Giant, and put them in Hall of Fame? It's a good question. I think each card has its own individual answer, as these are very different cards. Molten Giant is something we've talked about. The reason that it's dangerous in Standard is because the solution people use for Molten Giant is doing 15 or 20 points of burst damage in one turn, so that the Warlock players, mostly Warlock players, couldn't just play the Molten Giants and taunt them up. Now, we've moved away from being able to do 15 to 20 points of burst damage in one turn in Standard, and we kind of want to keep moving away from that, although there will still be some decks that do it. It's just sort of a price that you have to pay to do it is what counts. Now, in Wild, there's a lot more ways to do a lot of burst damage, so Molten Giant is maybe fine in Wild because of that. Blade Flurry, however, I'm not as sure about. Blade Flurry is often, with Oil or Deadly Poison or with new cards that, will be coming out, is a lot of board clear and a lot of face damage for 2 mana. Maybe that's okay. We don't know yet. It's something we'll have to watch in the future. Certainly, we don't think that we know the answers. We're going to keep making changes to make the game as fun as possible in both formats. Something we've noticed about Rogue is that it's always been a very good deck. Right now it's probably in the top 2 or top 3 decks, and it's been that way for a long time. So we're just going to keep an eye on it and hope that it keeps being fun to play and keep making really cool, fun cards for it. Ideally, they're new, fun experiences for Rogue and not always the same deck that you've seen for years. So we'll see how that goes.
Arca420 from the blog asks, will further Classic rotations happen? How permanent is a player's collection now that even Classic set rotations happen?
Will further Classic rotations happen? Yeah.
Well, I think the question is, will we see more additions to the Hall of Fame going forward?
Right, yeah. So we moved sort of the 6 most obvious candidates this year, but I think it's probably healthy to move a few more cards as we go on. We don't know what those cards are yet, or even if there will be for sure more cards, but it seems reasonable that there will be. One of the things that matters a lot is the percentage of cards that are being played in Classic in these popular decks. If it's still 20 cards are from Classic, we probably want to get that closer to like 12 to 15, right? We have a lot of decks right now like Freeze Mage and Miracle Rogue that use up as high as 23 or 25 cards from Classic. So we're going to keep an eye on those and keep making new cards and see how that changes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a lot of value in having the basic and Classic cards part of the Evergreen set. It does feel like a safe thing to to buy as a new player, just because you know that they're going to be around forever. And if you don't know how rotation works yet, and you haven't been through it, I think it also sets like a baseline of the iconography of the set. So I think there's, and also just like we don't have to keep making kind of the same cards with different names. We don't have to make Frosty Bolt and Icy Bolt and Icy Frosty Bolt, because we can just use Frostbolt. So there's I think real value in having a evergreen set, but it does make the job of Standard, the promise and the dream of Standard of a new stuff happening every year. I think it makes it more challenging, which is why we had to nerf so many cards when the first rotation happened, and why we had to do some Hall of Fame shifts this time. So we don't know yet what's going to happen. We're gonna have a whole year of data by the time we have to make decisions for the next year, but we do know that we're committed to the goal of making sure Standard feels fresh and exciting. And some of the the Hall of Fame stuff this time, these cards are not like broken. They're not bad for the game necessarily. I think they'll be great in Wild. But if you imagine a world where 20 years from now, the top decks at the World Championships are Freeze Mage, Miracle Rogue, these decks that we've seen a lot of, I think that's a worse world to live in. Let's have that as part of the Wild esports experience, but let's also have a format that changes all the time. It rotates and feels fresh and exciting every year. And so that's kind of the goal with some of these Hall of Fame changes, is to meet the dream of what Standard can be, without sacrificing these really fun decks from the game in their entirety, which is kind of what happened with some of the changes we made in the last rotation.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think if the decks that you're seeing on Ladder are not necessarily decks from Classic, but decks that have a core of things like new cards like Reno Jackson, like Dragons, like Jade, Pirates. All these things are new things that weren't a big part of Classic, and this year you're seeing them, and next year you'll see something different that is cool and new and exciting. I think that'll make the game a lot more fun.
All right, what's our next question?
This is your question, Ben.
Pugus from the blog. A common misunderstanding is that making 3 expansions a year, Blizzard is making Hearthstone more expensive. Is this the intended philosophy, or will Hearthstone plan to drip feed free cards during the free solo missions in between expansions to compensate the loss of adventures? The reason we made this change is to do 3 expansions a year and to make the single player content free is because we think it's going to be more fun. I mean, that's the kind of the core of it. Is we're thinking about how we, like, internal to the team, felt about expansions versus adventures, and also listened to a lot of people in the community, and just in general, we felt like expansions were more fun. They had a bigger impact on the meta. They allowed us to explore different types of mechanics in these bigger sets, and so just overall, we felt like it was the right thing to do for the game, for the fun of Hearthstone, to do 3 expansions a year. And at the same time, it is really important that Hearthstone is legitimately a free-to-play game. Like, you can actually play it free-to-play and compete at the highest levels as a free-to-play player. And we've seen that that's totally happening. Players are free-to-play players who are reaching the highest levels of competition. It's an attainable thing to be both a free-to-play player and a highly engaged, successful player. And that's something that we're going to continue to watch. It's important to us that remains true. I don't know how that will end up feeling, but we're very committed to making sure that Hearthstone is a legitimate free-to-play game. And one of the things we're doing is we've been increasing the amount of packs we give out over time. Tavern Brawl started introducing free packs. We started introducing more quests that gave out packs as rewards. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the free missions that we're going to start coupling with the second expansion this year will have, instead of gameplay exclusive cards as the rewards for being the missions, we're going to sprinkle some packs throughout the single player experience as well. So we're going to continue to look at that. I just don't know how it's going to work out. We're going to have to see what the player experience is and look at what number, like how many players are competing who are free-to-play players and reaching legend and things like that.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think getting the single player experience to be really fun and to sort of tell a story is going to be really, really great, and at the same time to try to keep players invested and excited and have enough cards. We'll see that over time. We have a question from the Hearthhead community. I understand that the idea is to combine adventure content with expansions. Is the adventure stuff purely for fun, or do you still get rewarded by doing PvE stuff with card backs? Is there still going to be the concept of heroics? So Ben hit on a lot of these already, but one of the specific questions here is there still going to be heroics? I think heroics are really fun. They're an important part. They really help you with some challenges. We don't have heroics this year, but we're still trying to figure that stuff out. We're actually going to try to make the missions a little bit more challenging. Just as a reminder, though, there's no actual missions in the next expansion. As the blog says, a lot of people miss this, the expansion after that, the one in the middle of the year, is where we're going to do the first missions. We're going to try something where they're a little bit more difficult missions. And then after that, we're going to keep iterating. We're going to try new stuff. We're going to give, maybe include more missions, things like that.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that, like, because we're not giving out gameplay exclusive cards, we had to make them really easy before, because otherwise you could buy a wing of an adventure and end up with like nothing to show for it because you couldn't beat the missions. So we had to make them easy enough for kind of the players with the smallest collections and the lowest skill to beat these missions, which is why the heroics existed, to like be that other side of things. We don't have that anymore. If you can't beat the missions, that's too bad. You don't get to play them. This is harder content. There's no gameplay exclusive stuff behind them, and so there's no there's stuff you could get by playing the game normally, like card packs. So we can make them harder, and we're going to make them a little bit harder for the second set of the year, and then we're going to see where we go from there. But we love the challenge of heroics, and so we're going to make sure that we keep exploring in that way and see what we can do. Maybe we'll do heroics going forward.
Cyanide from the blog. With your commitment on supporting the wild format, will you make buying old packs, GVG, NACs available for purchase, even if it's for a temporary period? That sounds pretty exciting.
So we're working on this. We think it's a thing we should do. So we don't have any announcements to make right now about how we would do it, but we think that reintroducing old content is something that would be good for Wild and good for the game and for players who miss NACs and want to check that out. So that's something we're working on. But this is not the Q&A live stream is not the place for making detailed announcements. So it's just for answering questions and giving philosophy. So we'll save the announcement of that kind of stuff for a little bit later. Here's a question from Dog from Twitch chat. Do you feel the rate of expansion release is appropriate? Do you think at the current rate the content stays fresh for long enough?
Right. So one of the obvious answers to this is, hey, we're doing 3 big expansions now because people have been asking us for, can you release more content? The expansions have a big impact, but the adventures have a smaller impact. One of the reasons why we're going to 3 big expansions per year, and we'll see that with this year. And as we go forward, we'll keep an eye on that to see, hey, is that enough? We noticed that in digital games like Hearthstone, content gets consumed very quickly, especially with our huge streaming community. The streamers show off, here's an awesome deck, here's the best version of that deck. Everybody is up to speed suddenly on that deck, and then it gets posted on all these different websites, and that proliferation of all those ideas in those decks is so fast that people often feel like they've consumed content before the next expansion comes out. Something that we're seeing occasionally, though, is people will discover new decks. Recently, we saw the aggressive rogue deck show up at the last 2 winter championships for Europe and NA, and it's really interesting to see people discover a new deck like that this late into the season. And it shows like, hey, maybe people can still be rewarded for being creative, even this late into the season. So I think we're going to keep an open mind, see how it goes. But it's a good question.
Yeah, I also think that we're starting to wonder, like, there's kind of a couple things that could make a meta feel stale, right? One of them is the balance is out of whack, and so everyone's playing the best deck. And so the experiences you're having playing are just kind of the same every time because you're playing against the same decks or playing the same decks. So that can make the game feel stale. But even like if you just extrapolate a kind of a well-balanced meta over time, eventually people will settle on some decks. And even in a world where decks have very close win rates to each other, you could still end up with the meta feeling stale over time. And I think that's actually, I tried to share some stats about this. I think that's where we kind of ended up in some cases with the Mean Streets metagame, is that decks are closer to each other in balance than they have been in some other metas. And yet there's still a feeling that the meta is stale and we're seeing the same things over and over again. And so I've been wondering, and the team has been wondering, is there a holistic change that makes sense to make? Because even if we hit okay on balance, and I don't think that we're making some balance changes, so I'm not sure that we've done that yet. But even if we hit perfectly there, is the game still not changing fast enough? Is our content release cadence right? I think there's upsides and downsides to making our content releases slower or faster. But I'm interested in kind of I'm wondering if there's a systemic kind of approach to trying to make the game experience feel more variant and different each time that isn't either just nerfing cards more frequently, although that's definitely an option. We could do that. That's one of the ways that we could solve this. Is how we're handling it this time is by nerfing cards. But I wonder if there's another approach to this. So I'm kind of curious about what we're talking about on the team. I think we agree that there's a problem here because we keep running into this I think it's like the third month post-release that there's just a feeling that things haven't changed very much and the game is starting to feel more samey than we'd like. But I think there's a lot of potential approaches: nerfing more frequently, releasing cards more frequently, and maybe even other crazy ideas. So we're talking about all of those things, and I don't know which way we're going to go yet.
I got another question here. Hearthstone Express at Hearthstone EXP. Would you consider posting wild season rankings on an official blog? Yes, absolutely. That's a great idea. Wild is something that we would like people to enjoy a lot more, and I think that with the changes coming up, it will be enjoyed a lot more as it continues to differ more and more from standard, and we're going to start posting wild season rankings on an official blog soon.
Here's a question for you, Mike, from Shazra HS from Twitter. How do you measure interactability / counterplay against combo decks? Are combo decks going to get some love?
Yeah, actually, I really like combo decks. I think the most important thing is to have a variety of different deck types in Hearthstone. We like having some aggro, some mid-range, some control, some combo. Combo is very fun to play, and it's important to have a bunch of different types of combo decks in Hearthstone. So one of the things we do is we try to include some tools in each expansion to sort of work in that direction. Oftentimes the best combo tools are ones where we don't really know exactly how they're going to get used, but we know they're powerful and they have a lot of abilities. Emperor, I guess, is Emperor Thorazon is sort of an example of that, in that it brings out a bunch of different combos, but you never know exactly which ones, and with each expansion the exact combos change. But I think there's some more interesting cards too. I think that you'll see in each expansion we try to include some of those, and you'll see more coming up in the future.
Like another kind of twist on that is like combo in general. How do you feel about that as an archetype? Where's like the right place for that to go in Hearthstone? What are like good combos and bad combos? Because I think we sometimes feel like we're sending the message that we don't like combo because when people see us moving cards like Power Overwhelming or Ice Lance, that's kind of the feeling some players get.
Yeah, when we have, so there's a couple different types of combos. A lot of combos would love to be able to kill you in one turn, right? They can kill you from 30 damage in one turn with no interaction, and we try to shy away from that type of combo. Ideally, the combo still does a bunch of tricky stuff, maybe even in one turn, but instead of killing you, it gets a big advantage either on the board or card advantage or some other kind of advantage. So those are probably a more healthy type of combo, or combos that take a few turns to set up in some way. So we're going to try to design to that, but it's a really difficult space because, you know, if players just find out one slight tweak, sometimes it turns from, you know, an interesting combo to, oh my god, you're dead. And I'm sure that we'll work together, we'll get feedback, we'll do nerfs if we overdo it. One of the things that we're on board with more is print some really cool, exciting, powerful cards. They're going to be dangerous. There's no way to know exactly how their players are going to use them. And then if we have to, we'll just respond after the players have found some crazy way to kill people. And hopefully they don't, but hopefully it still allows for interesting combo decks.
Here's a question from Twitch chat from MariBoy303. What kind of reaction of the community did you expect when announcing the Year of the Mammoth? I will say that I think we expected that there was going to be some excitement from some of the players who we've been hearing from the community a lot that they felt like there were some inherent issues with the way that Classic and Basic is set up to be evergreen, and how that's going to kind of run counter to the goals of Standard. And so making some of these changes, putting in the system of the Hall of Fame set in there to handle this going forward, I think for those category of players, we did some things that they've been asking for. So I thought that was going to be received pretty excitedly. But there's another category of player who I think rotation is always going to feel pretty negative for, which is the players who don't believe we are supporting Wild enough. And for players like that, it feels like we're just taking stuff away. It doesn't feel like those cards have two uses, or like they used to have two uses. Now they just have one, which is Wild, and I don't play Wild. It doesn't matter, so it just got removed. And that emotion, I totally get that, and I think that's just a reflection of how we failed to support Wild the way we need to. So we have been talking about what that means going forward. We announced Wild Heroic Brawls, or at least one, and Wild tournaments, and we have more details on all that stuff coming forward. But I don't think that's it. I don't think that we can just say, hey, we've solved it. I think we need to do a lot more to make Wild feel supported and cool. I actually think the format's awesome and going to be really awesome once the rotation happens, and they're much more different than they are right now. Right now, the only difference is GVG and Nax. Nax only has 30 cards in it, so it's going to be significantly different when it contains 5 sets in the Hall of Fame that Standard doesn't have. And I think that like having 2 metas and 2 exciting different ways to play the game is really healthy and something that we need to support more.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to experimenting the new Wild, try some decks. We got another question here from Twitch chat from Nice Zero. Have you ever known a deck people aren't playing that you thought was strong? If so, have you considered releasing advanced deck recipes? That's a great idea. I think that sounds really fun. We sort of have the community doing that right now, right? When a deck is kind of cool, but people aren't really playing it, you'll have someone in the community write either a post or a blog or something about that deck and why it's cool and how to build it. So I think that's a great way for our community to interact with other community members. I don't feel like necessarily we need to do that. However, deck recipes isn't something that we feel like we've fully figured out yet. We're experimenting still with deck recipes. When we made the deck recipes for the next expansion, we've talked a lot about that, and I think we learned some things. We're doing some experiments there. I think the Rogue deck recipe is an experiment for us in a different direction than our previous deck recipes. Yeah, but maybe I'm going too far in the future here.
I will say that we have seen decks in the statistics that are performing well that aren't kind of reaching the level of consciousness of, seeing its way on the meta reports or things like that. So there are players who are experimenting and trying new things, and over time that does crop up, right? We see people, as people win with the deck and publicize it, they start to become more popular. But we can see kind of earlier than most people when a deck is on the rise.
Yeah, almost always there's a deck that surprises me. It's like, oh wow, this deck is, it has 10,000 data points, which is relatively small compared to the other decks, but it has a super high win rate and no one has been mentioned anywhere. And then suddenly it might appear, or it might just go away because for some reason the meta was wrong for it, or something like that. So it's pretty interesting to see those things appear and disappear, and the community has definitely missed, at least according to the data, missed some decks that have happened.
It's interesting. We were looking at some Wild data the other day, and I remember seeing a stat. I'm going to probably get this a little bit wrong, so you'll have to excuse me, but I think it was like the top 3 classes in Wild were not the class with the number 1 win rate. It was something much lower than that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All right, another question here. Sidonia, what up? From Twitch chat. Power Overwhelming was played a lot initially, but not much in Karazhan. Can you explain why it is a problem with Emperor rotating?
Yeah. Power Overwhelming wasn't necessarily specifically a problem so much as there's a whole bunch of Warlock cards that are powerful, and the Warlock class in general is very powerful. And although they don't use a lot of classic cards, they still need like something to bring them down so that we can give them more variety with new expansions. On top of that, right, that's just one piece of it. It's actually 3 pieces, right? The second piece is just Warlock has a lot of burst, either with the Leroy Faceless, or just a zoo deck that happens to, Abusive Sergeant, Power Overwhelming. And even though Power Overwhelming isn't necessarily being used that much, although I think it's in basically all the Warlock decks right now because of the Leroy Faceless. It's sort of the mixed power of both, and I think once we take away that burst, they're gonna have to they still have Soulfire and Leroy, so they can still do a fair amount of burst, but they're gonna actually have to give something up to do that, right? Soulfire's a lot less consistent because you have to discard a random card. So I think that just lowering it a little bit, getting it closer to reasonable, so that when we can put new, exciting, powerful stuff in the future is I think a good place to be at.
All right, we've got a question from Jeffy from the forums. What are the team's thoughts/goals on further ladder improvements, and can we expect to see more changes this year? Excuse me, I'm getting over cold. We announced recently that we're introducing ranked play floors. Every 5 ranks, you'll be unable to backslide any farther than ranks 20, 15, 10, 5, and obviously Legend. And I think that's an improvement, but I don't think it solves all our problems. I think ranked has some kind of big areas for improvement that we're excited to explore and figure out better solutions for. One of them is the way the population is distributed. Most players hover around rank 20. If you have a less than 50% win rate, you're going to go down in ranks, up in ranks, and until you hit the wall at rank 20 where you can't lose any stars. So anybody with lower than 50% win rate at rank 20 stays at rank 20. The system inflates over time, so it's not 50% of players at rank 20, but it's close to that. I mean, it's like 40% of all players exist in this rank 20-ish bucket. And that means that matchmaking is worst there because there's more different players at that spot than any other place in the ladder. It also means that because of the way that the distribution of players lines up, it doesn't match your expectations of the ladder. If you're rank 12, it's actually it's right in the middle of the numbers, but you're actually by far one of the best players in the game, considering your relationship to the rest of the players. And so the numbers don't match your expectation. So I think that there's some issues on the lower end of the ladder that are much harder to fix, actually. On the higher end of the ladder, I think it's too grindy. I think players at the high end have too many ranks to go through. There's some just obvious solves to that. I actually think that our change will make an impact there. In our modeling, we've seen a pretty significant increase in the number of players getting to Legend, and how that will go as far as the grind. But I don't think it solves it. I think we have more work to do there. But the critical thing is, in the other modeling we've done, other changes to the ranks make it so that the number of players in Legend balloons massively. And we're just a little bit worried about what that means to the prestige of Legend and how it feels. If everybody's Legend, it's not going to feel very special. It's not going to feel very cool. And I think that there's some value to keeping it awesome. So I think that there's some more radical things that we're considering, but the easy solves, things like just having players reset less far or less frequently, end up causing other problems. And I think we need to find a solution that fixes the problems we have, but doesn't cause new problems. So we're talking about that. That's a big focus of the team right now. And we can continue to have that discussion and share some ideas with you guys and get some thoughts about that as we look at the rest of the year. But I think we have some I think we're excited that excited to fix the problem. I think everybody agrees, the community and us, that this is a place where it's the core way of playing Hearthstone. And so the better we can make it, the better the game experience is, and we're excited to make that better.
Yeah, what I really like about these rank 5, 10, 15 ceilings is once you're at rank 5, you can play whatever deck you want. You can mess around with a fun deck that you think might have potential, might be really good, but you never played it against rank 5 players before, so you don't know for sure, and not worry about, losing ranks. And I think that is also one of the reasons why a lot of stars will be added into the system, because those guys who are experimenting at rank 5 will lose some games, which means the other rank 5 players will get some extra stars into the system. And we'll see how that works out, and I'm sure we'll learn a lot from it over the coming months. We have another Twitch chat question from Linoxian. Were there any cards aside from Spirit Claws and Small Time Buccaneers that you were thinking of nerfing? Yeah, we talked about a lot of different cards. We talked about um, cards from Classic, and for those cards, we decided, hey, let's use our Wild rotation, making them exclusive to Wild as our place to put Classic cards, and that's what we do with cards like Ice Lance, which was like a card that we've been worried about for a long time. And we also talked about cards that were rotating out, right, a month later or whatever the next expansion comes out, because those cards, they're leaving pretty soon anyway, so they weren't great targets for nerfs. And we actually chose two cards that are going to be around for the next year at least, so that our nerfs are having an impact. So that's why we ended up with those two in particular. But yeah, there's more candidates. We'll see what happens after that. I think it'll make aggro a little bit worse. We're worried that when Reno leaves, control will also be worse, and aggro will gain a lot more of a foothold because of that. But there's so many new cards. We'll have to see. We'll keep an open mind, and we'll do what we need to do.
Yeah, I think it's important to make it a set that's exciting and take some risks, and then come in and nerf some cards later. That's more important than being very conservative and missing the other way, where a set has very little impact on the meta. So, but we are gonna watch things. I think we're and I mentioned this in the blog I did about balance and shamans and stuff. Is we're working on technology to patch in balance changes at a different pace than we have in the past. But that's still something we're working on. All right, Fex Haxor from Twitch chat. Can you talk about the rogue class identity with stealth and combo being nerfed?
Yeah, sure. The Rogue class identity. Yeah, we actually have some really cool ideas about Rogue. Rogue is a class that we're still working on, trying to figure out, hey, we want to give them really cool stuff. The people who love Rogue because they're doing tricks, because they're being clever, they're outsmarting their opponents. And that's a really strong identity. At the same time, we've also found that there are people who love Rogue for other reasons, and we want to give them decks too. So we're experimenting a little bit with the Death Rattle theme. We're experimenting a little bit with the Stealth theme. We're going pretty hard with the, Clever Tricks theme, and I think that's going to be the core identity for Rogue going forward. But we want to give them a couple other ideas, like the Pickpocket theme. I think that's a fun thing for a lot of players too. And it's important to have really fun things that some players will latch onto and love, instead of having like a mechanic that everybody likes a moderate amount. So we like that. It's one of our rules that we go by, and we think it has a lot of promise going forward.
That last question about Spirit Claws and Buccaneer and other cards we thought about nerfing. Are there other cards that you thought about moving onto the Hall of Fame this time that you didn't go with?
Yeah, obviously, Auctioneer was probably the closest. It was written on our whiteboard of ideas for a very long time, and I think it's an excellent choice to go into the Hall of Fame because it has a huge impact on the game, and it's been around for a long time, played in decks. And one of the reasons we didn't choose it right now is because it is such a skill testing and interesting and fun card. It often separates the players who don't know how to play very tricky decks from the players who are masters. You'll see someone like Dog or one of the other players who are known for their awesome rogue play doing things that other people wouldn't think of doing. They'd be like, oh my god, I can't believe he did that, or I can't believe he pulled that off on this turn. And there's so many decisions made around Auctioneer. Do you play it on turn 5, 6, 7, 8, based on, how many coins and preps and other things you have in your hand? And those decisions, even though they seem like small decisions, are actually have a huge impact on the game. So we decided that, hey, let's leave him around for another year, see if he's fun. I think Conceal changes a lot about how he works. He's a lot more interactive. Now you can actually kill the Auctioneer. You can kill the things that the Rogue sets up on the board, like Edwin, based around having an Auctioneer deck. So hopefully it'll be more interactive. We'll learn a lot from it. If we need to make changes to it, at any time we can just make those changes because we're willing to do that. And I think it's going to be a good year. One of the other worries is the same card in Druid decks, and that's certainly something that we're keeping an eye on too. Auctioneer showing up in a bunch of different classes. and being skill testing in those classes, because you have to make decisions when to play them, would be great, I think, as long as it's not too powerful that it shuts down too much else. But I do think that in general we want to have new types of decks showing up. The cards that you use with Auctioneer might change in the future, and then eventually maybe Auctioneer goes into the Hall of Fame too. That's something that you guys can give us more feedback on in the future.
Hero San from Twitch chat, can you share some insights on how the testing process works for new content, and would you ever consider some type of public test server? I'll answer the second part of that. Do you want to talk about how we test new content?
Sure. Yeah. So we go through about 8 months on every expansion, 8 months of game design on every expansion. We spend about 4 months on what we call initial design and 4 months on what we call final design. We test out major mechanics a lot during initial design and individual cards to make sure they have some good gameplay. But final design is where we get down to the real nitty-gritty, and that's when we start talking about, hey, is this card balanced? Is this card gonna create good gameplay or unfun gameplay? Is it gonna be skill testing, or is it just gonna be, something that everyone's just gonna run out on turn one? And as we go along, we learn more and more about that. We've gotten a lot of feedback from the community that the 1-drops are too powerful or not fun to play against, and certainly we're going to adjust and pay a lot of attention to our 1-drops, so I think that we'll keep iterating on that. But we play a lot of games. There's no way we're going to know for sure exactly how powerful a card is with just a small internal team playing. It often takes the community days, weeks, or months with millions of people playing them to find out how powerful a deck is, and we can't really simulate that. So what we do is we try to aim for, hey, let's make these cards about 8 out of 10, and we know that we're going to miss by plus or minus 1, so maybe the cards will end up being 9 out of 10 or 7 out of 10, and it's not an exact measure, but we try to aim for that number, and we know that some will be super powerful and exciting, some won't. And when we think a card supports a really fun archetype or a really interesting archetype or skill testing archetype, sometimes we'll push it to be more powerful than that. We'll push it up to 9 out of 10, and we'll play test it even more to increase our accuracy on that individual card. But there's so many different cool deck types that get built once we put the cards out that we can never know for sure. And I think that's kind of the great thing about Hearthstone is players figuring out the decks themselves. We want to give you the tools to do that, and we're going to try and do that more and more so that, we can't predict, but we realize that we can't predict, and we're just going to let you guys figure it out, find some cool stuff. If the stuff is broken, then at least we made some cool, awesome stuff and let you guys explore it yourselves, and we'll just make changes afterwards.
Regarding a public test server, I think that actually one of the biggest problems we're facing right now is how long is new content fun for? And putting new content on a PTR of some kind just makes players start using that content weeks or months before it goes live, and then is it stale day one? Do we launch the expansion with solved meta? Doesn't sound like the most fun version of the game to me. One thing we could see though is testing balance changes on a PTR type server to live cards, right? So we could, for example, put the small time Buccaneer nerf and the Spirit Claws nerf on the live server and kind of see how that goes. There's still some risk there. I think part of the reason to do nerfs at this phase is to shake up the meta and change it. So we would lose some of the value of doing nerf in the first place. So we don't have current plans for it. I think we could see it though for that kind of thing. But we'll have to keep talking about it. Here's a question for you, Mike. Ekop from Twitch chat. I'm happy about the stance to nerf cards more frequently, but what is your stance on buffing cards that are rarely played?
Yeah, I think buffing cards. So what that usually means buffing classic cards because the other cards rotate out relatively quickly. And classic is a set where we want it to have a certain percentage going forward so that people who own classic cards can always have the baseline for a new deck, and maybe they can even build some decks like, Aggro Hunter or Aggro Warlock relatively well with just their classic cards. But at the same time, we don't want it to be like a permanent impact. We wouldn't want to, buff another Druid card to be as good as Swipe, for example, or something like that. I think it's really important for Classic to be a fairly small percentage so that when new sets come out, you have new cores to build your deck around, new themes. So buffing cards just doesn't seem to have that much upside. If it had a really cool design, like a design direction, a build around direction that we haven't seen enough of and we think would be a really cool direction to go, like say we wanted to do more Murloc decks and the Murlocs in the base set weren't good enough, it just seems like, hey, let's do some more new Murlocs, and that way Murlocs will be cool for a couple years while those new Murloc cards are available, but eventually they'll rotate out and something else will be cool. If we made those changes to Murlocs in the base set, then Murlocs would just be powerful forever, and that's not really the goal of standard play, and it's more of a wild thing.
Yeah, actually, there's different goals for different types of cards, right? Some cards are meant to be funny or silly, or for players who want a kind of a crazy experience in the game. A good example is Major Domo Executus. That card is not, I think, like maybe the healthiest card for to be high level competitive play. It's for players who want to have fun, and that's like a legitimate type of player who doesn't care as much about competing on the esports scene, just wants to have a great time playing Hearthstone. We just target some cards at that type of player, and so some cards are kind of meant to be bad. There are other cards that are bad now, but won't always be bad. We print a lot of build around cards that change the value of things. So an example is
Paladin Secrets?
Yeah, Paladin Secrets is maybe, I don't know if it's a good example, but yes, there's Paladin Secrets were, for the most part, people weren't playing them. And then Secret Paladin comes out, and suddenly these are the cards you're seeing every time you go up on the ladder is Paladin Secrets over and over again. And so, we don't have to take it that extreme each time, but it is definitely a case where because bad cards exist, the value of your collection changes when new sets come out. Actually, it's much easier for us to change the meta if there's a bunch of cards that are kind of latent in the environment, that we could print a couple of cards and now bring them to the forefront, and everyone starts using, we only printed 2 cards, but now these 6 cards are getting play, including the 4 that you didn't see before. And that allows the meta to change easier than having to print 6 new cards that you're going to put in your deck in this one set. We can make several different build arounds with several different deck types. So it's dangerous if let's pretend we said, okay, the Paladin Secrets are all not great right now. Let's buff all of them. Now we can never make this new type of deck, and it changes kind of the way that we are able to change the meta more frequently. I actually have a lot of thoughts on buffing bad cards. I did a video a long time ago that Crip hosted for me. So if you have more interest, or care a lot more about our philosophy on bad cards, specifically, there's a lot of stuff about basic bad cards being bad that I have a whole different philosophy on, because those are kind of serving a different role. But check that out on YouTube if you are interested in that.
Our next question is from Chanman. Reno Jackson has been a big tool to counter the ultra aggro deck's most current method. With it being retired from Standard, what are your thoughts on healing across all classes in terms of the new cards this year? So we still have a whole bunch of new cards coming out before Reno Jackson comes out, right? There's a big new expansion with a bunch of cards in it. But the general philosophy is healing can be really important for the game because it creates these game swings back and forth where one person is winning and then he does something cool and another person is winning. AoE removal cards do that also. And I think it adds a lot to the game when it's like, oh my gosh, I'm winning. Oh no, I'm losing. Oh my gosh, I'm winning again. So I think it's good to have some of those. I think in moderation you can overdo it if you never know who's winning, because anyone can switch the game with one card. So I think finding the right balance is something that's important, and I think the cards that do that should change over time. And I think Reno Jackson did a great job of that for a little while, but if he was around forever, I think it would be too much. So we'll have some new great cards. I think we're going to do a lot of healing in the healing classes. We'll do armor in the classes that get armor. We're not going to do a lot of healing in neutral. We experimented with that before, and it helped a lot counter aggro, but it also it just has different value in different classes, and you lose some class identity when Healbot, for example, is being used in every class. So I think you'll see a lot of really powerful healing cards in the future. Probably not neutral, though.
At Wezel Power from Twitter. What direction do you hope to move towards in 2017? What are the wishes, and what do you hope will change? This is our last question, apparently. Because we're running out of time. So the 2017, I'm personally very excited about. I think we have some things that we've learned about that kind of set guideposts for us moving forward. One of the big ones is the team is growing. We're now like 70 plus people, and I think that one of the big focuses for us, both internal to the team and external to you guys, is communication. I think learning how to communicate within our team that used to be, I mean, we were like 15 people or something when the Hearthstone Open Beta went live, and now we're 70 plus. Is how do we work as a big team? How do we communicate, make sure everybody's on board and understands what we're doing and feels connected and can make a significant impact on the direction of the game. So we're working on that, and then also externally to everybody, we're working on our communication, and part of the reason we're doing stuff like this is to be more open and answer questions and talk. I think there is some risk in general as we do that, and I mentioned this in the last live stream. The more we communicate, it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to have more just by nature. Our announcements are going to be when we're ready to announce stuff. And if we fill the time between announcements with more communication, we'll just have less times where our communication is an announcement. It'll be sharing a philosophy so that you guys can check us and figure out is that philosophy right or not. But it'll just kind of change the type of communication that we do. But I think that's really important. So communication is a big one. Another one I think that is something we've felt we were lacking in the past is just a little bit of ability to execute on small quality of life stuff. We kind of focus as a team on big monolithic things, heads down on set rotation, let's get this right. And we've lost a little bit of the ability to make a small tweak here or there to make the game better in small ways. We're focusing more on that this year. And other things that we're focused on is making Wild a really great experience. With some really cool features that we're excited about that we're planning for this year. Obviously, I can't announce on a live stream, but we'll announce as we have more details and figure out how those are going to work. But and obviously, look, the biggest backbone of Hearthstone is continually making great new sets. We announced that we're doing 3 expansions this year. We kind of threw some hinty, spoilery images in that image on the blog. We spent a lot of time on effects and making these things really great. And I'm very excited about the content that we have planned for the year.
I am too. We have a lot of questions about Arena, so I want to let people know that we have a blog coming out this week about Arena, and this is going to talk about our Arena changes that are coming up very soon, but also the idea that now we have some more power over what happens in Arena, and so this is definitely like a phase 1, and then as we move through the year, we'll try out some more, we'll experiment some more with Arena and do phase 2 and 3. So keep your eyes on that blog coming out this week, all about Arena.
Sweet. All right, that's it. Thanks for everybody for joining us. It's been awesome. See you later.
See you later, everyone.